I prefer writing in the Irish language. I like the style of the Irish language. I like the fact that it's so full of emotion and so full of beauty. And then I had to translate them, of course, and that is a tricky thing to do. Very tricky, because poetry itself is full of all sorts of interesting things that's difficult to translate.
That was the voice of Julie Breathnach-Banwait, a Tasmanian-based bilingual poet. And I'm Martin Nutty.
And I'm John Lee. Welcome to our latest Global Irish Nation conversation here on Irish Stew.
This episode is brought to you by the American Irish Historical Society, located on Fifth Avenue in New York City. With an extensive schedule of historical and cultural events hosted in a fabulous Gilded Age mansion, the American Irish Historical Society is building connections from the past into the future. Find out more about events at the American Irish Historical Society by visiting aihsny.org. That's aihsny.org.
Well, welcome back to Irish Stew. So happy you could join us as we record this episode on Tuesday, June 25th. Or is it Wednesday, June 26th? It sure feels like summer, or is it really winter? Martin, have we entered the twilight zone?
I think you're just teasing our listeners, Sean. And, okay, let's play along with this. By way of introduction, our next guest has excelled in two diverse fields, psychology and poetry. She was raised on an island off the west coast of Ireland, but she now resides on an island off the south coast of Australia. While a child psychologist by profession, she is a poet by avocation, having published 3 collections of poetry showcasing her deep connection to the Irish language, are on Gaeilge. Her latest collection, Cnámha Scoilte, or Split Bones, was published in 2023 and has the distinction of each poem being rendered in both on Gaeilge, or Irish, and English. Julie Breathnach-Banwait tá fáilte rót go dtí an podcréile.
Gur míle maith.
And anytime I start speaking in Irish, as John probably knows, that means that our podcast episode will certainly have a strong component of the Irish language in it. And what's interesting, I suppose, and maybe our listeners would be interested to understand, is actually 4 of our most 5 popular episodes feature the Irish language in one way, manner, or other. So we're just going to add to that library. And we're delighted to have Julie join with us. And I'm going to start off with this. So if we first talked with each other on Zoom a few weeks back, you were kind enough to show me the view from your kitchen, which I'm actually looking at right now. But of course, our listeners can't see that. But if you turn around and look, stare out the window, can you describe for our listeners what you're looking at?
Oh, yeah, I certainly can. And I love to, because I'm so privileged to be able to see that every morning from my kitchen window. It's not dissimilar to the place that I've come from, actually. What's just behind me at the moment is the Derwent, and the other side, Hobart. And Hobart, as you all probably know, is the capital city of the state of Tasmania. It's beautiful. It's dark, like home. It's blue like home. It's got that deep green like home. It's full of beautiful trees and beautiful rolling hills that are slightly blue in color and purple. And all of Tasmania actually is very, very stunning. And it's, in my opinion, it is the most beautiful state of Australia. So I'm very privileged to be here, and I'm very lucky to get the opportunity to live here. I sometimes forget where I am, actually. I think I'm home sometimes until I go outside, and I'm privileged to live on the side of a cliff. So there's lots of hills and little cliffs here. So a lot of houses built up along the hills and the cliffs. So when I get up in the morning and you go outside, there are wild wallabies all around and possums. So that kind of reminds me that I'm somewhere else. Also, when I go into the forest, for example, you might forget where you are until you realize, well, these are gum trees all around me, and they have a certain distinctive look and sort of personality, if you like. So I'm always intrigued by that kind of thing. The trees constantly intrigue me. They're like pieces of sculpture because they're so crooked and so dry. So yeah, that's probably how I would describe Tasmania. It's very old, dark skies, which I quite like, I must admit. I'm a sucker for the dark skies. I like the clouds and all that sort of thing, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's just full of little creeks and canyons. And behind me, as I said, with the Derwent, there's a variety of boats that go up and down quite regularly. There's actually cruise ships that go into Hobart that pass my house. And you can see there's some cargo boats that go up and down. And also the big race that happens from Sydney to Hobart every year. It ends up in Hobart. So on New Year's Day, you get a variety of sort of vehicles, if you like, that go up and down. So it's quite intriguing. You never know what you're going to get. That's what's beautiful about it.
Julie, you mentioned the dark skies, and I looked up Tasmanian tourist office, and what are the best attraction to Tasmania, and one of the first things they mentioned was stargazing.
Oh yes. I suppose its position helps, doesn't it, where it is in the world? Yeah, so I mean, recently with the beautiful colors that everybody was seeing in the sky, that's something that's quite common in Tasmania. So yeah, we're lucky to be placed in such a gorgeous place. It's very, very beautiful. In fact, it's stunningly beautiful. Tasmania would really take your breath away if you like nature and that sort of thing. It's really beautiful.
I think we're going to need to send this reel into the Tasmanian tourist office for play back in Ireland.
I don't work for them.
Let's kind of spin the wheel backwards because I mentioned in my opening that you were actually born. I don't know for sure whether you were born on an island, but you were born in Connemara in a region called Ceantar, nOileán.
Yes.
nOileán. Which basically means, translated into English, and you can correct me, the region of the islands.
Yeah.
That would be the best way to describe it. So talk to us a little bit about that place, about your people, or as they say in Irish, the winter.
Yeah, my winter, yeah. Okay, so Connemara, as you know, is parts of Connemara divided up into little islands. And they're connected, obviously, to the mainland by little stone bridges. Another beautiful little place full of mountains and, sea and rock and beautiful trees and that sort of thing. So I grew up there. I was born there. I grew up there. My family are still there, some of them. I went to school there. It's an Irish-speaking area. And I did all my primary school and my secondary schooling in the local area through the Irish language. I was fortunate enough to have that. I left there after I'd finished secondary school, or high school, if you want to call it that, into what I call English-speaking Ireland, into the other side, to go to university. So yes, my people are still there. They've been there for generations. If I go really far back, I think there may be some connections with the Aran Islands, actually, on my mother's side, but it's not something I delve into that much, actually. But yeah, my family are still there. My community are still there. Friends from school are still there. A very, very beautiful place that's full of a lot of sort of respect for literature and drama and art and music. I grew up with a lot of sean-nós singing around me. So when I was quite small, I remember people coming to our house and playing musical instruments. That's quite common in Ireland, and it certainly was years ago. And I remember people singing in my house when we were very young. And I remember a lot of people dancing. So I kind of grew up with that. And the sean-nós, of course, as you might know, it's poetry. So you're just raised in that environment of poetry all the time, and it's very loved, and it's like a weekly occurrence to be exposed to that sort of stuff. Yeah, so that's what Ceantar na nOileán is like. It's very beautiful, again dark like Tasmania, and wet and damp, and full of character. And like other parts of Ireland, I suppose, little pubs that you sit in, or little big fires, and people tell stories and drink beer, I suppose.
So you kind of refer to the fact that of leaving there and going to English-speaking Ireland.
Yes.
Did you feel like somewhat of an exotic creature? Like I haven't heard anybody actually say that to me before, so I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you can't escape English in Ireland. It's an English-speaking country. So even when I was young, English is all around me. You have a TV, for example. So it's not as if I didn't hear it. Of course I did. And you learn it in school. And people speak it around. There are people who speak it around you. You might have classmates from wherever, and they speak it, and you speak it to them. But fully immersed, I think what I was referring to is when you leave somewhere and your primary language becomes different, you start to sort of reflect a lot on who you are, particularly when you share with people that you're from a Gaeltacht area or you're an Irish speaker. It kind of leads you into all sorts of conversations and directions you hadn't really ever anticipated. So that's when I really started reflecting on it and thinking about the differences between the two places. I mean the Irish-speaking and the English-speaking communities.
Were you kind of viewed as a foreigner in your own land?
Well, I have to say, when you share with somebody, or when I used to share with somebody that I was an Irish speaker, and those kinds of things come up in conversations all the time. People ask you all the time in Ireland where you're from. It's quite a common question. You probably know that already, I'm sure. So when you share that information, it can lead to a variety of different responses. So you learn as you go on what those responses mean, I suppose, because initially it's quite baffling, actually. Because you can share that you're an Irish speaker and people go, that's awesome, that's amazing, that's wonderful, I'd love to be an Irish speaker. Or you can share it and you can be met with a deadly silence. Right? You can share it and you can be met with anger sometimes. So you learn as you go on. I don't know if it's completely safe to share this here, or you learn to sort of adapt as you go on and sort of figure out where it's safe to say those things or not. Because as you know, the language is quite embedded in politics and that. So you learn as you go on, I better not say anything about that here. Or, yes, this is a place I can share that freely and it's appreciated and that sort of thing.
I'm very surprised to hear anger would be a reaction.
Yes, you do get it sometimes, but I have to say it's not as common as which is good. Normally, you get a good response. It's just that you learn things about yourself, particularly when you're a teenager, and you learn to adapt as you go on and figure out what you can and can't sort of say, I suppose, in whatever context you're just figuring things out, aren't you, when you're young? Whereas now, I probably, when I share that, it doesn't. The responses really don't have such a strong effect on me, I suppose.
Yeah, the virtue of maybe being a little bit older, I think, and not caring quite as much of other people's opinion of you.
Yes, being wiser. Yes, I suppose, and how you work.
No, it's interesting when you talk about anger, because we had the pleasure of having Monach and Magan on the podcast, and he made a T.G. Cahir film, but he goes around Ireland speaking Irish. I think that the series was called No Berla, meaning no English. And so what he tried to do was travel around Ireland without speaking a word of English. It's quite funny and quite sad. But one of the things that he said was that at times, especially in somewhere like Dublin, he was met with anger. And he was kind of put off by the anger. And then he kind of said, the interesting thing was when they saw the footage of the film later, what he also saw was what he described as shame.
Yes.
The shame of not being able to speak one's own language in a way, right?
Well, that's probably part of it too. But there's also some people are really excited about the Irish language, and some people that you meet are so happy that there are people who are interested in it and speak it. So there's that too. Yeah.
But you moved out of Ceantar nOileán and then went and got educated. And I noticed you got your degree, I believe, from the University of Cardiff, if I'm correct, University of Wales in Cardiff. Is that correct?
Did eventually, yes. I moved out of Ireland and lived in England for some time, very close to Wales. And yes, I did. I lived in Ireland for some time before that, but moved out for various reasons, I suppose. And yes, I studied in Cardiff.
I was just wondering, when you were in Wales, were you exposed to the Welsh language?
Oh, yes, of course. Yes. And that was a beautiful thing to be exposed to. In fact, I had classmates at the time who were Welsh speakers. So I didn't learn Welsh myself, but it's beautiful to see it all around you. It's beautiful to see it on, road signs like you see in Ireland with the Irish. It's beautiful to see, people celebrate it and be excited about it. So yes, lots of Welsh speakers are around me.
I just had an anecdote from 100 years ago. I was in northern Wales on my way to the Holyhead Ferry, and I started talking to a bloke at the pub, and so I was heading to Ireland, and he's like, yeah, the Irish, they got their freedom, but we kept our language.
Ah, right. Okay. Yes, they did. They have a lot of support, I think, financially as well for the Welsh language, which we do have some support, but I don't think it's supported as much as the Welsh languages. So, yeah, that helps a lot.
So you get your degree in psychology. I think you specialize in child psychology. And what happens then? Is the move to Australia takes place at that point in time? Or what's the arc of your travels?
Not straight away. Now I have to kind of roll back a little bit here. Not straight away. I stayed in England for some time, and I had my son, I remember. So no, we didn't move to Australia until about 3 or 4 years after that. So I was working as a psychologist in Somerset, in North Somerset, a beautiful part of England, just close to Bristol on the southwest, very sunny and very bright and very nice indeed. We lived there for a while before we moved here to Australia. We moved to Perth initially.
And what was the driver behind that?
Oh, well, I have to blame my husband for that. Yeah, he's not here, so it's very easy to blame him when he's not here. Yeah, so my husband went to school in Melbourne, so he was very sort of, he was thinking, I think, for a long time to come back, and he liked Australia a lot. He likes the climate. The lifestyle is quite different to Europe. It's really, in my opinion, quite easy to live in Australia, actually. Yeah, I think, so I kind of agreed to come along at the time on a visa, and I think I came reluctantly, to be honest. I came with my arms folded, thinking, oh yeah, I'm not really going to like this. This is really, this is somewhere I'll go and have a good look around and enjoy, and then I'll just go back home. And that was 15 years ago. So I think that's probably how a lot of us end up places. We kind of go, I'll give it a go and see what it's like. And, you're youngish and you're kind of thinking, yeah, that'd be fun. And that's probably why I'm still here.
Mm-hmm.
So you weren't transported there like the Irish of the past?
No, definitely not. No, I came here, and in my mind, I was coming on a 4-year, 10-month visa. And when those 4 years and 10 months were done, I was going to go home. But yeah. So then, of course, with the child, your child settles in, your child's going to school. And before you know it, 15 years has passed. So that's kind of, I think, what happened with Australia. But I don't regret it. It's a wonderful place to live. Very beautiful and very vast.
I understand you started off in Perth, but your move to Tasmania itself is relatively recent.
Yes, it is.
So what was the motivating force? Because Perth is all the way in the west of Australia. It's a big city, but it is quite remote from the rest of Australia, as I understand it.
Yes,
and
it is.
then Tasmania is probably the remotest place in Australia. So were you always in quest of remoteness?
I may have been. Who knows? Who knows? Tasmania also was probably just like how I came to Australia. It was something we did for a short period of time. Or something. We came here for 4 months, and that was 2 years ago. So again, we clearly have a habit of going places and not leaving them for a long, long time. But yeah, we at the time, I think COVID was around. Oh yeah, so Western Australia was very closed during COVID. We had very little COVID in Western Australia because the borders were shut. We only had hundreds, a couple of hundred cases ever. So we were very stuck and trapped and that, but for good reason, to keep everyone safe. So once the gates opened, if you like, we thought we would take it, because we hadn't left WA for a long time. We thought we'd take a drive across the Nullarbor Plains. So that's across the bottom part of Australia. I don't know if you know it. It's the drive from Perth all the way across the bottom of Australia, around the Great Australian Bight and across to Adelaide and then up to Melbourne and then down south towards Tasmania. So we thought we'd give that a go, just to do something fun. And of course, as soon as we left WA, I got COVID on the way. We were traveling, so I know. So we had we bundled my son and ourselves and the dog into the car and started driving. So we eventually made it to Tasmania after, I think, about 2 weeks on the road, and a week in hospital as well in the meantime, and made it down here. And it was just so gorgeous that we were very taken by it, and I think that's what kept us here. We felt there's a lot to see, there's a lot to look at, there's a lot to explore, and it felt beautiful. So we thought we'd stay here for a while longer.
And just for our listeners and for ourselves, me and John, to be honest, since John, you've never been there, right? To Tasmania. No. Well, no. I certainly haven't.
No.
I think of Australia as being a desert surrounded by a rim of habitable zone, but I don't think that's a fair description of Tasmania, what limited pictures I've seen of it, it seems quite green.
Yes.
And probably has a lot more in common with Ireland in many respects than Australia does.
It really does. And something I forget actually quite often is that Tasmania is very far out to sea. It's a 12-hour ferry ride to the mainland from the northern part of Tasmania. So it's very far out. It's more, in my opinion, it's very similar to the New Zealand landscape. It's closer to it than it is to the Australian landscape. And of course, parts of Australia are very dry and deserty, particularly nearly all of the middle, I would say. Perth is quite dry and deserty, but there are parts to Australia that are, that are cold and dark. Mm-hmm. And even Melbourne and Sydney, they get cold winters. And we have a beautiful mountain here in Hobart. And in fact, Hobart is built right underneath it. And it's snow-capped in winter. So it's that kind of cold, So I think, parts of Australia are dry and deserty, but there are pockets that are cold.
Yeah, and as I understand it, like half the population lives in Hobart. There's only about 500,000 or so people on Tasmania, and it's about 80% of the size of Ireland. So it's got to be pretty thinly populated, kind of rural, I would think.
It is, and that's what's beautiful about it. To be honest, lots of rolling hills and cows and fields like you see at home, the Jersey cows, and little villages with the cladded houses, beautiful. Low, houses that have low ceilings and that have beams across the top and have little fires inside. So there's lots of that, very, very similar to Ireland.
So let's talk about this nexus of Ireland and Tasmania in a way, as seen through your poetry. Your latest book, and I believe you've had 3 published works, is called Split Bones, or if I use the English term. Tell me something about the title of that book.
Okay.
I have my own theory, but it's probably way off base.
I think the title for me was really trying to describe what it's like to be an immigrant. How you are split between various places and how you belong to neither, I suppose, and belong to both. And it's that kind of idea I think I was thinking of. When I go home to Ireland, you probably find this too, Martin. I mean, the connection is instant. It's easy, and it's so familiar, and it's just and it's just so easily you can kind of slip back in, And yet, when you come all the way to the other side of the world, as in my case, I also slip back in easily. So it's that kind of feeling very split all of the time. And I think as well, when I first came with, because when you live somewhere so far away, you have to commit to it. It's not as if you can pop home for a weekend if you're feeling that you're missing home. You really have to stick with it and work through it. There's no going around. So and you have to at some point, I think as well, if you're really feeling that you're missing home a lot, you have to at some point just take a scissors and kind of go snip. And that's really hard as well. So it's that kind of experience I think I was thinking of when I called it Split Bones, because that's what it feels like, right down to your very marrow. You're separated and you're belonging to, 2 different places.
Is the poetry, I believe initially you wrote exclusively in the Irish language, and now you write sort of parallel, this current book parallel English and Irish. But was there something of a way to connect back home in writing in your native tongue?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And that actually also happened accidentally. A lot of things in my life clearly happen accidentally, but
let's hear about the accident.
Oh, yeah, the accident. Well, I've always liked poetry, so I kind of, used to read a bit of it. I studied a little bit at uni when I was there back in the day. This is uni that I went to in Ireland, and I really quite like Irish language poetry a lot. It's musical, it's lyrical, all that sort of thing that I like. And I wrote a little bit in my early 20s, but I never did anything with those. And it was just by accident. I was walking along one day past Dimmock. Now, Dimmock is it's probably like a Barnes and Noble or something you might have in the States, lots of books and stuff. And I remember seeing a poetry book in the bestseller section or somewhere close to it. And I remember picking it up and thinking, oh, I'd forgotten about this. This is really nice. I like poetry a lot. And it's amazing what positioning a book somewhere in a bookstore is amazing, the effect it has, on people seeing it. So I picked it up and I really loved it. And I thought, maybe I could do a bit of this. So I sat down and I started writing little bits on my phone, and it just felt right. I just started writing them in Irish, and that felt good, and I enjoyed it a lot. And so over the next few months, I sat down in this little cafe one of those little chain stores that you see around the place. And I got my tea every morning, any chance that I get. And I wrote down a poem here and a poem there. And I thought, oh, what should I do with these now? So I wasn't sure what to do. So I sent them to Ireland. And that's how it kind of the ball went rolling. The ball started to roll, I suppose. And I got in touch with Cushcame, and Cushcame said, yeah, they really liked them and that they'd published them. So that was a big surprise for me, because I thought they were just all right, So I thought, I didn't really think that much of them. There's probably a lot of people out there who write loads of stuff and never share it, and they just think it's all right. So the trick is really share it, because what you write can sometimes have an effect on others, be it positive or negative, but it can still affect others, I suppose. So they liked it. They thought it was nice. It was meaningful stuff, they felt. So they published the first book for me in 2020. And then they published another one for me in 2022. So once I was on that road, if you like, I kind of couldn't stop. I just kept going with it and kept going with it and kept going with it. And I'm still going with it. So it's a bit like, I don't know if you know that movie Forrest Gump, where he's running and he's running and running and running. And then one day he says, I've had enough of that now. Right. I think that's probably how I work with things. I just keep at it. And then one day I'll probably say, that's enough of that. I think I'll do something else. So I kind of went into prose poetry then through that. I think it was just felt like a natural kind of evolving for me. So that's what got me into that. And ever since then, I'm just doing it. I've been kind of consumed by it for a number of years now. And it's opened up a lot of connections for me with the Irish speaking Ireland again, which I hadn't been involved with for years, and not intentionally. I didn't mean to not be involved with them. You just get carried away on your sort of path in life, and you just keep doing what you're doing, and suddenly you're jolted into something else, and that reconnected me with home, and that was a really good feeling, to be reconnected with your people and your language and all sorts of things. It's almost like it was sitting there all along waiting for me to wake it up. I just needed a little kick to get it going again. So I'm really glad it happened, but because I'm in touch with so many different people and organizations in Ireland through this, which is really good.
So talk to us about the language of your thought. When you have this spark of kind of, if you will, that'll make for a great poem. Why is it in Irish and not English, or is that the case? And how do you think on a day-to-day? What languages do you think in?
Oh, yeah, that's a very, very strange question. What languages do I think in? I think I probably think in both. I've been using the English language as my first language for a very, very long time. So I switch between both easily. So when it comes to writing, I because I like psychology so much, and because I'm quite interested in philosophy and stuff, that's the kind of things I write about. I write about things with a lot of emotion. I like talking about, it's my job. I like talking about emotion. I like thinking about emotion. I like reflecting on the things that drive us. I like to talk about mental health stuff. I like to talk about relationships, family, all that sort of stuff. I delve into quite a bit of poetry to do with anxiety and depression and all of those things that I deal with myself in my professional life. So that's that's what kind of guides me, I suppose. And I don't have any particular formula or anything for it. I just sit and think about, things that have maybe things that stay in my memory from when I was young, things that sit with me. And that's basically what drives me, Martin. I think it's just the kind of person I am. I'm very interested in emotions and very connected to the emotional world. So that's kind of, I suppose, a lot of poetry brings in a lot of emotion, doesn't it, into it. So that kind of suited me, I think. That's probably why I'm not writing novels or, I don't know, other genres. It just suits me, I think, as a person.
Is there a therapeutic aspect to your writing, either for you or for someone else?
Well, for me, writing is something you have to be very focused on while you're doing it. It's like any art that you are involved in. I think you have to be fully committed when you're doing it, and that is focusing your mind like that is like pure rest. It's a mindful activity where you have to be. All those other things that go on in life that we're all pulled, from one direction to another, they just get pushed out of the way, and you're just like completely directed on what you're doing. And if you can do that for half an hour, that's wonderful. It's like meditation. It's wonderful. It's really good for the mind, and it's very grounding. So that's awesome. That's a great activity for me.
Yeah, I'm thinking of, we just had an announcement the other day from the Surgeon General in the United States talking about children and mental health and the impact of social media. And it's interesting that you talk about mindfulness and focus, because it seems there's a lot of anxiety, especially amongst younger people in America, triggered, it seems, by social media and people living in a constant state of interruption rather than a state of focus.
Yeah, it certainly does feel like that. I don't know how you guys feel, but it certainly does feel that life is very interrupted nowadays. Even for us as adults, we're pulled from one thing to the next, and it's very difficult for us to stay concentrating on one thing. And sometimes there's a very interesting theory in psychology called the saturated self, which I like a lot. And it's this idea that when everything is coming at you, you can freeze. When there's so much coming at you, when there's so many decisions to be made, you end up being swamped. And it's very difficult to do anything when you're swamped. You've got to be able to push things out, move things to one side, and focus. But when everything is coming at you, this is quite hard to do. So I think that's might be a useful skill for the future, is really thinking about what are those things that calm us, what are those things that we know make us feel nice and focused and calm. Because I don't think we were ever designed to have that much coming at us. And like I said, that applies to adults as well as children, I think.
Well, Julie, it sounds like you've been able to push those things aside enough to produce several volumes of poetry. And we've been sort of dancing around your poetry here without really getting a sense of it. So we have poems that are both in English and in Irish. And we'll get into the different approach you have to writing in those two languages, writing basically the same thoughts in those two languages. But this might be a great time for you to share a poem of yours both in Irish and English.
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to do this one. It's quite a short little one. In the Irish language, it's called Beochan. In the English language, it's called Awakening. And I'd like to read it in Irish first, maybe. And then I'll just read it in English afterwards. Okay. Beochan. Tá sé ina híbhrean is le trí bliana, is iad deanta ag lúsca le dorchad as a leanan, imrácha gan funneog, doras na teachtas. A anal chola muníl, a bhéra ag talla a cín mar bháil bolla, a glór ag tanna an a bheola ag scarta ag madral, Ornaí is ascaní gan ahant, fevers is sinis, scíis is músí marmish, Sín sí leis, faoi bheochan a flid iarne, faoi chlóca a chreidir. Nuair a dhéanann solas brilacha tí scalp idir orsí an doris is clár ámad an orlar. Nuair a bheith bachlog ar dhéga ag beochan mar a bheith is lán, Línta haar muile fonne fánachtas fuilnú bogfar. Is sína sesin siar, mar nach nanhín sé an scáilúd a chuichna. Awakening. It's winter now 3 years, and she is stranded swaying with the darkness of her lover in a coupe without window, door, nor respite. His breath is on her neck and his fingers pierce her head like a bowling ball. His voice surges from her lips, cascading and churning vespers and curses unknown to her. Fever, illness, fatigue, faintness, bouts of blinding nausea. She sits with him under the weight of his arm blanket, under the cloak of his belief. When light seeps through the gaps between the door hinges and the floorboards, when the weighted buds appear on the branches like they're full, spilling over with energy, awaiting new blood, a shift will occur and he'll fade, as he won't recognize the glare that blinds him. So that one I was thinking about at the time of people shifting out of, I suppose, a darkness that might sit with them, and how when light comes, how I suppose things get a bit better for them when that shifts naturally by itself. So that's kind of what I was thinking of with that poem, how sometimes people can sit with darkness for very long periods in their lives, and how it feels like that it's not going to shift.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. Good morning.
A false road. But you referred earlier to the fact, Julie, that the form of poetry you use is prose poetry.
Yes.
Likely for a lot of our listeners, they're not familiar with that. So tell us about why you chose that as the way to express yourself.
Yes. So prose poetry is something that's actually not a very sort of out there kind of genre, I think. It's gaining more and more recognition now. And a lot of people ask me, what on earth is that? That's not poetry and that's not prose. Well, it's a bit of both, to be, it's exactly what it says on the tin, I suppose, as they say. So I kind of got into this accidentally again, because that was the book that I kind of picked up initially when I was walking past that bookshelf I was telling you about. And it was the Australian book of prose poetry by Cassandra Atherton from Deakin University in Melbourne, and Paul Hetherington, I think he's in Adelaide. And they had put it together, a collection through the years of Australian writers. And it was just the most, to me, it was just the most interesting book. In fact, I still have it. I carry it everywhere with me. It's gone up to Ireland with me. It's gone up to Asia with me. Everywhere I go, it's just full of gems, like beautiful pieces that are full, and it's so full of variety. You never know what you're going to get from one page to the next. So I was very taken by it. And that's actually what inspired me to start writing in that style. And when I did start writing in it, it felt natural. It felt right for me. It felt I had said what I wanted to say, it just in that size, if you like. And I really, really enjoyed it. Again, I sometimes you don't know exactly what draws you to things, just a personal preference, I suppose. It's just a style that you kind of go, oh, that's really nice. I like that. And I like reading little short bits myself, short, powerful little bits that get you thinking. So I think that's what brought me into that. Now, as far as I know, there aren't other prose poetry writers in the Irish language, and if there are, I would love to meet them. Sometimes it's called sometimes there's a genre called flash fiction, which is probably a little bit longer. I'm not exactly 100% sure what that is, but it's similar to prose poetry, I believe. But prose poetry felt right for me. I think it's like anything, trying a pair of trousers, they fit nice. So you kind of go, yeah, I'll go with this. This is right. So yeah, it's just a personal preference.
And when you were approaching that poem, what was the process in terms of Irish and English? Were they coming to you in parallel? Did one come first? How much is one a translation of the other or a revisioning of?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, all of these poems in Cnámha Scoilte in this book, they were all written in Irish first. All of them. It's a book that's been translated to English. So none of those poems were written in English at all until I kind of started translating them myself. And that was a really tricky thing to do. Now, as an Irish speaker, you spend a lot of your life translating anyway. Some of our books in school were in English because we didn't have Irish books, not for all our subjects. So you get used to translating, all the time. But no, I prefer writing in the Irish language. I like the style of the Irish language. I like the fact that it's so full of emotion and so full of beauty. And then I had to translate them, of course, and that is a tricky thing to do, very tricky, because poetry itself is, full of all sorts of interesting things that's difficult to translate.
I was just going to ask, what is the Irish for bowling ball?
A bowling ball, bowler. Yeah, this is where you go into Chandlin, where you open up your dictionary and you kind of go, oh, okay, that's not something we'd have encountered in nOileán, a bowling ball, but there are words for them if you want to find them. So I'm learning myself, to be honest. I mean, a language is a thing you're always learning, isn't it? Yeah. So it took me quite a while to translate them, and it was quite a frustrating process actually, for some of them. So
why do that?
That's a good question, because translating from the Irish language into English can be frowned upon sometimes. I did that because, first I live in Australia, so I don't live with the Irish community, the Irish speaking community, and a lot of people were asking me, we would love to see your translations, and I hadn't thought of it again until people were asking for access, I suppose. They would like to see what the poems are about and all that sort of stuff. So it was friends mostly and family members and, people who said, maybe you could translate some of them. That way we might be able to learn. Of course, it's good for learners too, if they want to give it a bash and they can look at the two things side by side and, they can compare in that and learn from it. So that's probably why I translated them. Yeah.
I would say, as somebody whose Irish language skills are not great, that I do appreciate the effort that was involved. And as a learning tool, it's exposing me to new words or new meanings. Yeah. And it's, from my point of view, a real pleasure. I start off, I'll read it in Irish, then I'll read it in English, and then I'll go back and read the Irish again. And then I'll try and line them both up.
Yes.
So I understand it a bit better. I think it's a very rich experience. And it's interesting because my experience being educated in the Irish language as a Dubliner, primarily who's, an English speaker, was during the early 70s in Ireland. All Irish was taught in schools absolutely through Irish. There was no acceptability of English at all. Oh, and I think a lot of English speakers in Dublin found that particularly frustrating. Oh. So it's great to have these two things side by side because it's a real aid in the experience.
It is. And to me, language is like a code. So I love bilingual books in general, any language. I think I love to read, for example, a book where it's Spanish on one side and English on the other, just looking at the structure of the language. And it's like a way into a culture, isn't it? That you may not get if you don't speak the language. So recently I saw one in Arabic translated to English by an Australian poet. And it was just so interesting because then you get to know, because you get to know about people's cultures. You get an understanding about what people are talking about and thinking about and how they understand the world and everything. So that to me is intriguing. So I love all bilingual books, to be honest.
One thing that struck me in reading one of your poems, which is set, I think, or based on a visit to a reef, coral reef, maybe a coral reef, not sure, near Western Australia. I can't remember the exact name of it. Was you're writing in Irish about a place, describing things that would never have been seen by Irish people.
Yeah.
Or maybe they were, right? But talk to me about using the language which is designed for the country of Ireland, the geography in Ireland, and the experience of Irish people, and then transposing it into Australia, looking at things that no Irish person would have seen, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that one was about Ningaloo Reef, which is the northwestern, is the north part of Western Australia. There's a beautiful reef up there, which is as beautiful as the Great Barrier Reef, but really doesn't get the publicity at all. So it's beautiful, and we went swimming there. And I suppose everyone is affected by their environment and what they see, aren't they? So this is what I see. So that seems quite natural to write about. Now, there is another Irish language writer here in Australia called Colin Ryan, and Colin is a friend of mine, and his family came to Australia in the 1800s, and they came with the Irish language, and of course it changed as they went on through the generations. But Colin has taught himself the language from scratch. And if you read any of his books, he talks a lot about the Australian language landscape and through Irish. And it's beautiful, just talking about cockatoos and whatever it is you see around you, the possums, the wallabies, the gum trees, all of those things. And it's lovely. I think I was kind of inspired by him as well to write more and more about Australia. And of course, for me as well, coming out of Europe and coming into Perth, which was like moving to a very deserty, dry place, that had quite an effect on me because it's burnt and it's red and it's hot and really, really bright. So I suppose that was very difficult, sort of, for me to adjust to very quickly, especially the bright light of Perth. It's just the strong blue skies that are really bright all the time, and the light always coming in through the window like it was something really threatening. But yeah, so that the environment, of course, I love the natural world, and that would naturally spill through my writing. And I suppose if I like to write in the Irish language and the Irish-speaking community, particularly the Irish-speaking community, are very connected to land, as are most of Irish people, actually, not just the Irish-speaking community. But my dad was very, very connected to the land, and he was always talking about the land and looking after it and preserving it and protecting it and tending to it. So I think he that probably brushed off on me as well, to notice all those things around me, and really, again, it's a mindful thing, isn't it? Observe where you are, enjoy where you are, and and look at the physical world around you. So yeah, that seemed. My dad had beautiful Irish, and when he talked about the land and the landscape, he had an ability to describe that really well, and I think that probably stayed with me.
Let me bring up one last poem before we move on. Maybe it's along the theme of not where you are, but where you were. The poem is called Deaf Town. And I'll just mention just a few lines from it. Apathy rises from your cobbled streets, steam like. I have knelt naked for your acceptance and love. And then later we see, you have told me, tribe city, back turned, I'm not for you, time and time again.
Yeah.
So Tribe City would be Galway.
Yes. That's quite an angry one, isn't it? And I did think for a while, maybe I shouldn't be so upset about this, but of course a feeling is a feeling, and anger is as valid an emotion as any other emotion. So yes, so when we were young, we used to go into Galway, obviously, going into the city for whatever reason, and you have to switch, and switch languages. And then, even then, when I was quite young, I used to feel, well, why do we have to do that? But, once you become aware of the language that you're speaking, and once you become aware I can't use that here, even though I only live 25 kilometers down the road. And it's that kind of rejection that I personally felt from the city. Now, of course, the city does loads of things to support the Irish language now. I wasn't aware of those when I was living there. I don't know if they were there when I was living there. They may have been. But it's just a personal kind of rejection that you may feel when you're part of a community, but you're not part of it, actually. So I think that's what I was writing about there. Yeah. But it doesn't stop me speaking it, of course.
So, yeah, I think the language is in transition and its standing in Ireland is shifting. But unfortunately, we are getting to the point of the podcast where we actually have to shift away.
Oh, okay.
Or maybe we have to invite our friend Seamus Plug into the room. And so what we want to know, Julie Breathnach-Banwait, is what is your Seamus Plug?
Oh, my plug? Oh gosh. This is okay. So Cnámha Scoilte is a plug, I suppose, but I also have something else to plug. So only about 2 weeks ago, myself and Colin Ryan have released a bilingual book here in Australia called nOileán From Other Earths, and this is a book of poetry. It's just it's not prose poetry; it's just poetry. So. Yeah, that's what I'm plugging, I suppose, and my own book, Cnámha Scoilte, and that's probably it. I'm not very good at plugging things, unfortunately.
We'll try to help.
We will be glad to plug on your behalf. Mm-hmm. And so with that, on behalf of John and myself and our listeners, I'd like to thank Julie Breathnach-Banwait for spending time with us, telling us a little bit about her origins, her life in Tasmania, and about her deep love for the language. The book is Cnámha Scoilte, Split Bones, and it's published by Bobtail Books. And I know in America you can definitely get it on Amazon, and I'd recommend it to everybody. It's a wonderful book to dip into. It is rich in its geography. It is rich in its emotion, and you can't ask for anything more from poetry than that. But I'll add one more thing. It provides the opportunity for those whose Irish maybe isn't that great to re-engage with the language and understand the beauty of the language in a deeper way. So thank you, Julie.
Thank you very much, Martin. That's a much better plug than what I did.
Guramagat. That is so.
Martin, two things I like best about doing Irish Stew is the exposure to new ideas and new things. For me, prose poetry is a great discovery, and also love our virtual visits to people in distant corners of the world. And I guess from New York, you can't get too much more distant than Tasmania.
John, I absolutely agree. And one of the things that I really like is the bilingual nature of what Julie is doing. So she's doing Gaeilge and she's doing English. And you can look at two poems side by side. And for somebody like me that's trying to refresh their Irish skills, I think this is a great publication. So you can steep yourself in the beauty of two languages all in one book. So total pleasure. Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.